So Ferdi Grofé was an American composer, arranger, and conductor from the United States. He worked with George Gershwin in the Paul Whiteman's orchestra. Here we have it. One of the most celebrated of the 30s. Its conductor, Paul Whiteman, was known as the King of Jazz, and Grofé was the one who actually orchestrated the Rhapsody in Blue, a work that was originally conceived for two pianos by his colleague Gershwin. Grofé's most famous work is undoubtedly his masterpiece, the Grand Canyon Suite, here. And although the composer has not been among the great composers of the history books, his extensive and varied repertoire remains emblematic of his country and has nothing to envy to other great American composers of his time. After this short introduction, I must say that I'm very happy to have the pleasure today of speaking with his grandson, Alain Grofé.
Hi there. Glad to be here. Yes. Well, I knew my grandfather. I met him. Really, my first memories of him were when I was about 10 years old. He was living in Southern California, and we loved to go down on vacation. And it started a pattern where we'd see him one year, then he'd see us another year. And so I got a chance to really get to know him. And he was in my life as much as a composer and conductor can be, who's all over the world. He was in my life until he was at my wedding in 1969. And he died in 72, shortly after that. So I knew him from, 54 to 72. Those years were the time I spent with him, which was limited. He had a full life, but I knew him through all that.
I'd like to start asking you about your work doing you are compilating and recollecting memorabilia. How's that all the procedure with the manuscripts or photos and digitalizing all the stuff?
Yes, I've been. It came from my grandmother, who was his first wife. My grandmother, Mildred Grisel, was her maiden name, and she was a lyric soprano in New York. Had a career of her own with another woman, was on the radio a lot. They're called the Sunshine Girls. So that's that he met her, and then he went on, divorced after about a dozen years or so. Had a second wife, Ruth, and then a third wife, Anne, a typical musician maybe. And so I have quite a bit of memorabilia archive stuff from my grandmother, and then I had a lot from my father, who had collected some stuff. And of course, and then I've been collecting my for the last 15 years myself, mostly through eBay, as stuff came up there. So I decided the only way to really preserve this material was to digitize it. So I started digitizing. Gee, it's really been 10 years. It's been off and on because it's a very laborious. If anyone's ever tried to do a scanner, even doing a score, of his sheet music or something is 10 pages, 8, 10. It's very slow going. So I've been working on scanning and digitizing everything that I have, and I'm getting very near the end. I'm into a lot of little family photos, but I have about 20 bins of material of his, everything from piano rolls, records, sheet music, manuscripts. I was just doing some manuscripts that my grandmother had that are, hold on one second. I just had them here yesterday. So I'm in Love with You is the title. I don't know if you can see that. But anyway, it's not signed by him, by Ferdi, but when I looked at I do have an original manuscript of his that he wrote called Mother. Every musician writes something for his mother. And I was looking at the way it's written, the actual score, and it looks exactly like this. So I believe that these were songs unpublished that he wrote that my grandmother had back when. So I do have some of that, not much. His background on that front is he donated all of his manuscripts to the Library of Congress, and then back in the 50s. So they have a monster collection, and it's in the Ferdi Grofé collection. It's in the music division there, and I visited it many times. and it has about 250,000 documents of his, and it's just manuscripts though. There's nothing else there, and the only thing that was there in addition to his manuscripts were a lot of press clippings that had been, people in the arts pay companies to track their press clippings. And so I was just up there about 3 months ago, in which I went through all of their press clippings, spent 2 days solid there from when they opened to close, going through all those press clippings to pull out the not just little notices when it was going to be on the radio, but articles about him when they'd have something actually descriptive and published. And I scanned every one of those. They have a great scanner at the Library of Congress, speaking of scanning. And I spent 2 full days, and I have 563 pages of each one has one or more article on my grandfather. That's part of what I'm going to keep. They've obviously let me do all that and keep all that. So my point here is that I have all the memorabilia. I'm sure that I have an uncle, but he doesn't say he has anything. So this is my legacy, to try and digitize all that I have about his life, including some biographies that were written, a number of things. And from that, I would like to expand and get a full biography done of his, about him. So I've been scanning it. I'm almost done. It's been a labor of love.
So I have to ask you some of that stuff for me. You showed me the last time a manuscript from the Rhapsody in Blue, the first bars. Yeah. Can you show us?
Hold on. You want to hear the story of this?
Yeah, sure.
There's a story to this. So while I'm up there doing that scanning of all those press releases, the head of the department asked me if I wanted to go down and see some of the original Gershwin stuff, and I said sure. So it's a gigantic building in Washington. So we go to the elevator. It's all very secure. Scan this, scan this. We go down to the basement. Scan door, go in, and we go into this room. It's very cold. Obviously, they keep it. It's a store. It's designed to be an archive. So it's not a really huge room. 30 by 40 compared to the other rooms in the building. And he said, "Follow me." So we walk down the aisles, and there's rows after rows of manuscripts and music stuff and all kinds of stuff. I didn't have time to really look. We go down to the end, and when we're down there, he says, "Now take a look at this." And he says, "This, I wanted to show you this." He takes out a box, he said, "This is the first, this is the Rhapsody in Blue that Gershwin handed to your grandfather to do the scoring, to do all the work on it. So do all the parts and put it together and do the orchestration, sorry." So I'm looking at it, it's in a plastic thing, and it's just like, wow. That was really cool. So I said to him, "Can I take a picture?" And he said, "Sure." So he lays it down on the ground, and I take my phone out, I take a picture, but I could tell the plastic was really distorting it all. It's like, it wasn't going to be that good. So I said, "Can you take it out of the plastic?" He said, "Oh, sure." So the minute I see what he's doing, he's taking this fragile Gershwin manuscript, and I'm like, something's going to happen, and I'm going to be responsible. I was so scared. He slides it out, and then he puts it on the plastic. And so I bent over and took a photo of the very first page of the Rhapsody in Blue score. And by the way, and I have it, I have it, and this is it. So you can see that's the front, very first page. Interestingly, it isn't Rhapsody in Blue. It's titled A Rhapsody in Blue. Mm-hmm. If you look everywhere, there's no reference to it being titled as A Rhapsody in Blue. It's all Rhapsody in Blue. And so I'm saying the real name for it is A Rhapsody in Blue, mm-hmm. which I thought very fascinating. But it has the famous glissando at the beginning of Rhapsody in Blue. But that's before this was done before that actually happened, before they actually made that the glissando. So it doesn't say that. If you look at the original, any publication.
Original scale, and later on, they put a glissando to the clarinet, isn't?
Yes, and this, of course, is pre that. So I really, this is one of my prized possessions because it's got all this. It's really beautiful. It's cool to see it all written out by Gershwin and annotated. I didn't get all of it, but I have the cover one, so I'm very happy to have that. Can you see it?
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, a Rhapsody in Blue.
Yeah. Yeah. So it does. And so I found that very fascinating because I was looking up at it, as I have it on my wall, and I said, that says a Rhapsody in Blue. So anyway, that's the story of how I have the front page photo of the original. Now, there's an original one also that they have up there that's different than this one. This is the one, they worked for days together to do the Rhapsody in Blue, Gershwin and my grandfather, Ferdy. There's lots of stories about how all that transpired. There's different versions of it. I have what my grandfather told me about how it all came about, including there's some stories about how that glissando happened too in Gershwin's piece. But my grandfather told me that. And it's a little different than you'll see published around a bit too. When they went into rehearsal, first off, they were all the Whiteman Band was playing on Broadway in New York, playing every night. So when it was announced, and there's a story behind how Ira Gershwin, was reading the paper and found out about how there was Whiteman was going to be doing a new composition by Gershwin, and he said, "George, what the hell's this all about?" And George had remembered a conversation he'd had a year before where Whiteman had said, "Hey, I want you to do something for me. I'm coming up here," but he left it very ambiguous. And so all of a sudden, and Whiteman was quite a showman. I guess he just announced he was going to do it based on that weak conversation. So all of a sudden, it was just a couple of weeks to go, or something like that, 2 or 3 weeks. And so Gershwin immediately said, "Oh my God, I can't not be there for it. I mean, that just destroys that whole thing." So he took some work that he'd been doing. He was on a train back and forth a bit. There's quite a bit of, and he started to write that, put that together. But as he was kind of composing it, he would work with my grandfather. He'd hand him the parts, the pieces that he so far had gotten, and they worked night after everything shut down after they played. They worked on putting this together, and the document I just showed you was the final one that he did to give to Ferdy to do the orchestration for it. So when they went into rehearsal, there's a gentleman who plays the clarinet. His name slips my mind now, but he was just screwing around at the beginning, which you can see as I showed you before. It's a series of up. No, you know more about that than I do, and he was playing around with it, and he made it a glissando. And according to my grandfather, it wasn't exactly the way Gershwin wrote it. He was a stickler for that, and he didn't like it. It was too jazzy. But my grandfather liked it. So he still refused to have it played that way. And so my grandfather went to Ira and said, "Ira, that's the way that's got to be played. I know he didn't write it that way." And Ira agreed. He said, "Okay, I'll talk to George." So Ira went to George and said, "George, come on, let's do that," and got him to do it. So actually, my grandfather, working through Ira, got Gershwin to do that, which is one of the most famous pieces of snippet of music in American history. So that's how it got included in the concert, and when you see the manuscripts written, that's how they're written.
Gershwin didn't want to publish the Rhapsody in Blue, and that Ferdy, he convinced him of publishing the work. Is that correct?
I've never heard that before. I've never seen that interview. That's news to me.
Well, I'm thinking of the Rhapsody in Blue now. That means a lot to me. At the time we were writing it, Gershwin lived in an apartment house in New York, and I called on him every day to pick up whatever music he had written, and then I'd take it home and score it. And that was a close association over, I guess about 10 days, 2 weeks time. In the first place, George never knew he was going to write a piece of me. He read about it in the papers. So he started it, and I worked with him. And, it had a lot of fond memories connected with that and his home life. His people were Russian. They taught me how to drink Russian tea and gave me Russian food to eat. I was practically a member of the family. So that brings a lot of nice, fine memories back to me. And when it comes to the E major, the da-da-dee-da, part of it, when he had gotten to that point, he had written something else. It had nothing to do with the piece at all. Well, I didn't say much, but he saw that I wasn't exactly pleased, so he always liked to improvise on the piano, so he had to play this melody, and I asked him, I said, what is that? Well, he said, I wrote it about 5 years ago when I was demonstrating piano sheet music to the theatrical trade, I was paid about $25 a week to do this. So he says, I happened to write it then, and says, it's just another. I said, it sounds pretty good to me. Would you mind playing it again? And I'd like to make a lead sheet of it and take it home. So he did, and I wrote it down and took it home, and I couldn't sleep that night, and I started playing it on the piano myself. It just wouldn't let me rest, so I went back the next day, and I said, well, why don't you write something like this instead of what you have there now? And, he says, I said, it's too trite, it's too sentimental. I said, it's the most haunting thing I ever heard. I said, I wish you'd consider it. And by that time, Ira, Izzy, we called him Izzy then, his brother, the lyric writer, happened to come in the room, and he was wondering what we were talking about, and we told him, and he said, George, well, I don't remember that tune, play it. George played it for him. Oh, yes. And I said, well, I think Freddie's got a point there. I said, well, why don't you use it? The classicists, they keep borrowing it from their own tunes. They keep using it over and over. I said, because you wrote it 5 years ago, it wouldn't make any difference. You should use it. So between Ira and I, we convinced him that he should use it. So that's the story, the behind-the-scenes story of the Rhapsody in Blue.
There's two collections of my grandfather that are, one of them's here in Florida at the university, that's an audio tapes that he donated to them. It's extensive interviews from all the radio interviews and stuff that he's ever done. And he would, my grandfather was a wee bit of a character in regards to his, he was a bit flamboyant, and so he would, like lots of times, the only thing, he would embellish stories a bit, make them a little more grand, like a lot of people in those. This was the 20s and 30s. It was the flappers, and so lots of times the stories varied a little bit. That's part of the reason why the Rhapsody has different variations on what happened. So
the repertoire of Fer de Groffet, is it usually programmed there in the USA? Because here in Spain, I'm pretty sure that the only work that has been performed is the Grand Canyon Suite, but it's usually programmed there, Fer de Groffet's works in the USA.
No, it's not played anywhere near as much as I think it should be. And he was underestimated. When I was growing up, I was raised in Utah, small state in Utah. The era that he was in, it's if you study it, and that's what you're doing, it really became the first American music. I mean, the point before that, it was some, other, jazz was sort of, native American. It was American, but the first serious American music came out of that jazz. And, Ferdy was the first to really write down a lot of the stuff, to put it, it was all improvised, and he was the first to really structure it. And so it moved out of dance, jazzy, tried to get, got more serious when he did Mississippi Suite, Rhapsody in Blue. Those were the first serious American music compositions in America. Everything else was European and derivations of that. So since it grew out of the swing, dance kind of thing that was going on with jazz, I don't think it was taken seriously. When I was growing up, people would call it, "Oh, that was really pop." I mean, I'm talking about serious people, not just the general public. They treated it as not classical music. If it wasn't classical music, it wasn't serious. I think that's had a big influence on his perception and of his music here in the United States since then. One of my goals of trying to get all of his memorabilia digitized and get his name out there more is to make him more of a name. I'm in Florida. The Florida Orchestra has told me they're going to play the Mississippi Suite next year. So that'll be good. Every time I see it, and here's an example. I have never heard the Mississippi Suite played live.
Wow.
Nowhere. And I'd make a beeline for it. And it's just not played. And that's his second most important piece of music after Grand Canyon. And so I just think he's totally underestimated in terms of his contributions to American music. Again, like I said, between Gershwin, Copland, these people, like a gentleman, a conductor friend of mine said to me, he said, without Grofé and Copland, there wouldn't be movie music.
Yeah.
And I went, wow. That whole thing, he scored a lot of stuff for movies too, Ferdy did. And it changed the whole dynamic. That's the derivation of real. He used to play the piano in silent movies in movie theaters. That was a part-time gig. He'd do that for money. So he was playing, and it was all original stuff. Nobody had anything. He just played to the movie. He was extremely talented. He could play I don't know if you know this or not, but he played virtually almost every instrument in an orchestra. He could play trumpets and violins, and he played everything. And that's why I think that contributes to him having been a great orchestrator. He knew what they were capable of doing, knew how it could be played. It was a huge thing. So, he was a child prodigy. He was playing the piano with his mother, playing the clarinet. I think it was a clarinet when he was 5 years old, accompanying her. He wrote his first piece of music, at 11, published at 14. He was extremely talented man, and I think that again, back to the story there, the timeline. I think that since it grew out of that era, I don't think it was taken as seriously. It's still not. We still our music here, our classical music in the United States, is still dominated by European music. Our people all go to see Tchaikovsky, Chopin, all those people. That still dominates. When someone you want to make money as an orchestra, play Beethoven.
Yeah.
Not Grofé. Not even Copland.
Totally. So I was gonna ask if Verdi's life and work are studies there in the U.S. conservatories, but I don't think so, neither.
No, not that I know of. I haven't followed that per se. I do work with the Florida Orchestra here. I'm a member of the Friends of the Orchestra. I've done lectures on Ferdy with them. So I don't hear anything about that coming up when I talk to young conductors or anybody else that's seriously studied.
Mm-hmm. So here in Spain, we have studied a lot of Spanish composers, and every professional musician know the most famous ones. But there, a musician, maybe most of musicians even haven't heard about him, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, it's Paul Whiteman was a smash in Europe.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was extremely popular. They took a big tour over across the Atlantic and spent a couple of weeks in Europe, in England mostly. And it was just a huge success in Europe. That's a lot of American music, including jazz, as you probably know, was very popular in Europe, almost more so than the U.S. It was very appreciated, and that's, I think, the same thing, the way jazz was appreciated in Europe, and a lot of black jazz people went over to Europe because it wasn't appreciated here much. And I think the same thing with the music from the 20s and 30s that the Whiteman Band did was really big in Europe. So, not that it wasn't big here. I mean, they did a song that sold 1 million records, and in those days.
And why do you think? Because Gershwin's music or Copland music, it's very similar in the concept of on the aesthetic with Rufus music. Why do you think Gershwin and Copland are very popular, very famous in the whole world, and why Rufus music, being the same style, has not been as popular as other composers?
Well, it could be, as I said, I think it might be that it's very specific. The Grand Canyon Suite, for instance, describes the Grand Canyon, and it may not be as interesting to someone in Denmark that the music is a descriptive Grand Canyon with sunrise on the trail. I don't know if the subject matter gets in the way. I really don't know what has inhibited that. It's an unknown to me. And when I ask people about it, they give me the same. They don't know.
Yeah. Do you know maybe if any work that your grandfather never wanted to publish or bring it to light?
Well, he worked a lot on commission. When I saw him in the early 50s, he was working on a piece that was due for the University of Arizona, for a project in Arizona, and so commissions to him were a way he made some money, and he was always, like most musicians, late or composers. So I had the opportunity to watch him compose in those days, because a deadline was coming when we were down in California. And I have a brother and a sister, and his wife at the time, my grandmother, let us go in and watch him compose at the piano. Dark, he kept all the blinds down. He was very focused. He was at the piano and plinking and writing, and we got to stay in there for about 15 or 20 minutes. But I think a lot of it was commission, and that stuff all got done. But I think he was very prolific. A lot of stuff around, but most of it. And the Library of Congress manuscripts, which I've looked through extensively, most of it's published. It made it in. I didn't get any reticence from him to, I never heard him say anything about that. I don't know if he was reticent for publishing. I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that work that you are talking about, that commission for Arizona, maybe the Death Valley Suite, maybe, or not?
No, it was Going to the Sun Suite.
I don't know that.
I know. See, I can send that to you. I have the.
Okay. I don't know. I know a lot of suites. The tablet suite.
Oh, there's a ton of suites that he has that are not even known.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
The audio or something.
In fact, later on when that was recorded, it was actually performed for their. I don't know, it was their 50th anniversary or something of the state of Arizona. He gave me a recording of it, which he wanted me to take over and give to the University of Arizona State University. So I was in the Air Force in Phoenix, so I took it over and went over to it, and there was a whole big presentation where I gave them the recording. They really appreciated that. So there's a limited number of those. There's a few that come up on eBay every once in a while. There were, I don't know how many were actually issued, but that's a piece too. I have that record.
Do you know what relationship was between Grofé and Whitman?
Whiteman, of course, Ferdy was playing in San Francisco evenings and after work and all that sort of thing. When Whiteman came over and saw him and just thought it was unbelievable, especially because he was putting it all down. It wasn't all improvised. It was more structured, and he just thought, oh my God. So he asked Ferdy to join him out of that, and Ferdy as a pianist, and that's what he was doing. And watching Ferdy play the piano was one of my big thrills. I loved that. He did that for us, 3 or 4 times. It was one time he did it for the whole neighborhood when he came to visit us up in Utah, and it was just cool to see him play just so effortlessly. It was just amazing. But anyway, Whiteman got him to join him as the piano player, and very successful. And they that was one of the times right away they did a song that sold 1 million records. He didn't have anything to do but play the piano on. Gradually, he started to orchestrate stuff, other people's stuff, and then he stopped being the pianist and became the orchestrator. They had a very strong relationship through all that. There were, the Paul Whiteman band was only, I don't know, at the max 20 people when it got really big, and most of them played multiple instruments. If you see pictures of the Paul Whiteman Orchestra, you'll see someone sitting with 8 different, horns next to him, because he, as the parts came up, he just grabbed the next one, so they could play a tremendous variety of music because they were all multi-talented. And Ferdy was best friends with a number of them. Mike Pingatore, there was a number of them that he was lifelong friends with out of the band and orchestra. And I think the conflict, there certainly was a period of conflict. And that's when Ferdy wanted to go out on his own. He started to write. He did the Mississippi Suite, very popular. He realized it was time to do that. So once he went out on his own, and going on his own wasn't only composing, but he formed his own orchestra, was on the radio with an orchestra, the Ferdy Grofé Orchestra. He started to be sponsored, playing for various cigarette companies, Lucky Strike.
Philip Morris, America's most enjoyable cigarette, presents the Lucille Ball Desi Arnaz Show, I Love Lucy. Your attention, please.
So all of a sudden he was a competitor. And that changed the relationship between Whiteman and Grofé, because now he was an orchestra in competing with the Whiteman Orchestra. So they did reconcile later on. They had quite a bit of disagreement there for a while. But later on, they got back together again and were fine.
I think I read about he had also a dispute with Gershwin because of the intellectual property with the ASCAP.
Yes.
The Rhapsody in Blue.
Yes. When you talk to people about the Rhapsody in Blue, and if you listen to Ferdy's music that he composed, and you listen to Rhapsody, you can see how much he contributed to Rhapsody in Blue. I mean, Gershwin did the piano part, but his orchestration and his, so a lot of people, very knowledgeable people, say that he should be co-composer of Rhapsody in Blue. I mean, that's the point. So he felt the same way. So they got in a dispute after it was out there and became such a huge success, whether he should get credit for it. And they got into a disagreement over whether he should or not. And they went to court, and then they settled out of court, and then Ferdy got some residuals from it, but he did not get the recognition that he felt was his officially, and so that it's not a Grofé Gershwin piece. Did you know that the only major piece of music that Gershwin didn't orchestrate is Rhapsody in Blue?
Yeah.
And you know what happened after Rhapsody in Blue? He said, that's not going to happen again. They had the dispute, the whole thing. I'm not doing that again. He spent 2 years learning to orchestrate. He studied orchestration so that he would never, and he did all of his own orchestration from then on.
And I think that without that orchestration, of Groffe's orchestration, Gershwin, he couldn't be the one who is now without that orchestration.
You know, I would agree with you. I think that changed his perspective dramatically because, you know, it was just a piano piece and he'd been writing those kind of piano pieces. So had Ferdy. I mean, piano pieces were written. If you look at the sheet music at the time, it's all really oriented towards piano. And the reason for that, of course, we forget in the 20s, when all this was going on, radio wasn't even around. I mean, the only thing people could do was get a record and play it at home. I mean, vinyl, that first thing. So all the focus was on getting records out and the bands trying to get on recording contracts and a lot of piano stuff because it was easy to do. And then the sheet music. People forget that in those days, sheet music sold by the millions of copies because everybody had a piano at home. People played these pieces at home from the sheet music. So, and I have a ton of Ferdy sheet music that he, for not only his own songs, but that he orchestrated, you know, and co-wrote and all that with other people. So I have quite a collection of his sheet music, including some autographed and inscribed and all kinds of stuff that he received and sent out to people. So in those days it was, you know, vinyl, and then radio took over everything. Then radio became the new wave, and that's when Ferdy went out on his own with this orchestra and had his own weekly show in New York. So anyway, that's that piece to it. So.
Also, Grofé, he also conducted, as you told. How was Ferdy as a conductor? Did you know something?
The general consensus that I always got from people who really know was he was okay. Yeah, it's funny. It just no one gave him much credit on the conducting side. I don't know why. But that was, I'm being honest about that. I'd love to say, oh, he was revered, but most people said he was just good.
This is Bert Parks, presenting another famous composer and conductor, Ferdy Grofé, directing his own symphonic arrangement of his original Mardi Gras suite. Ferdy Grofé now concentrates on the orchestra. They've got to be note perfect for the Saturday night party, and this time the notes spell the Mardi Gras movement from his own composition, the Mississippi Suite.
But he certainly, and I don't know if he really loved doing it because I always just saw him composing. I mean, I think he just loved composition work. That's what he thrived, and I saw everything him do. He'd do his own. I mean, obviously go out and conduct the Grand Canyon Suite, but that was a real privilege for him and for the audiences to have him conduct his own work. So that drove him into it. And of course, like I said, he had his own orchestra in the 20s or the 30s. That was actually in the 30s on the radio. So there's two. I have 6 of them. They're all inscribed with his. I don't know if you can see this. They all have his. Can you see that?
Ferdy, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. They have his name on them. So I got these as one of the last things I got from Ferdy's estate. And I have 5 of them. Most of them are long. I have a couple of short ones of his.
Yeah, cool. They always conducted with very long buttons. There's a lot of pictures of Whiteman with, I think, enormous.
Yeah, hang on, I'll show you. I've got one. I think. Yeah. So, in contrast, I have this one. So. Look at that, huh? Ta-da. So I don't know.
Enormous or very small?
Yeah, maybe the bigger. I don't know if it correlates to the size of the orchestra. I don't know. The big orchestras, maybe they had to see you from far away. I don't know. And then the little one, I don't know, quintets or something. Yeah, those are in fact prized possessions of mine, as you can imagine.
Tell me about that. About film music. Did he work a lot for composition for a screen or film music, movies?
Yes, he did that. He did that in the 40s and in the early 50s. In fact, I think his most famous film score and his best film score was for one of the very first science fiction movie film done. I mean, W. Griffith did one in the 30s, but a real serious one done in the early 50s called Rocket Ship XM. And he did the film score for that. And it's considered very, very good film score. That's the best he did. He did King of Jazz. He did a number of film score work, but only a handful. I would say, 6 to 8 different movies in his life. It just it was later on for him. So,
do you know if I thought about it now? If he knew Copland?
Not that I know of. No, I've seen nothing that makes any reference to Copland and he. I don't know why.
Or Bernstein, because no. I know that Bernstein has conducted and recorded the Grand Canyon Suite.
Yes, they did not get along. I know that. Bernstein didn't think much of the Grand Canyon Suite, according to my grandfather. My grandfather told me he didn't really. He was another guy who, I think, felt that it was not classical enough. It was back to pop, too much pop.
He did that also. He composed.
I know, but yeah, no, but no. My grandfather was not a fan of Bernstein. That I know. So.
For Bernstein, Grofé's music it was like second line music, also.
Yes, that's the.
Because he does the same.
Yes, yeah, his music is the same way. Interesting. I don't know if you know this, but in the U.S. the postal service here is very discreet about what it puts on its stamps. It's very it's hard to get a stamp, you know, for any purpose done. I mean, you could say I love daffodils, and I'd love them to do a stamp with daffodils, but they, you know, they have a limited number they do a year. Well, back in the 70s, they put out a series of composers and conductors stamps, American composers and conductor stamps. And they picked 5 conductors and 5 composers to be the best American composers and conductors out there. And of course, Bernstein was one of the conductors. But so was Grofé, along with Charles Ives and Gottlieb, was one of the top 5 composers in American history. And that was such a big deal, because they don't do that. You know, they go through incredible research to come up with the winners of that sort of competition of who would consider that. And my father collected stamps, coincidentally, his whole life. So he was so thrilled that that had happened, that they had picked Ferdi to be one of the classic, and it was classical composers. It wasn't pop composers, it was classical composers. So, and they were on the more, you know, Gottlieb and Ives and Grofé. Those are not great names that you hear out there. I mean, they're not performed a lot. It's just, these are sort of the serious American composers that don't get the attention. It's, again, I think we in America need to, here's one of my mantras to, maybe my final mantra, and I said it earlier. We need to get serious about American music. We need to begin to open that up versus European music. Not to denigrate the European music, but you know, we're some 200 and something years old, and we still, our concerts here are, I mean, dominated by European compositions. Hey, this is America. Where's the American compositions? When are they being played? When is our population being exposed to the creativity in music that this country has? All those people I just mentioned, it's not done. I just wish, you know, it would be an aha moment from somebody, but they're afraid. I think they're just afraid to go out on the limb. In terms of if they do any of that, it's always a little snippet of it. You know, they'll throw it in. I'd love to see a Copland Grofé concert. Well, I could see you guys doing that more than us. I mean, you have the basis of all the great, you know, composers from history, so I can see why that would have a harder time getting programmed. But I don't know why we haven't been able to flip the programming perspective and start to think about who has contributed to the American music scene.
I'm going just to ask for any funny anecdote, because I've seen your Facebook that you sometimes publish some curious or anecdotes. Can you tell us some?
Yes.
Or introduction.
All right. Here's one of them. When we went down to see him in Southern California, he had a really beautiful house in Santa Monica Canyon, and he was very, very well known in Santa Monica. I mean, he was like such a personality. I mean, when we go out to dinner, I mean, they just revered him, and the whole place knew. I mean, he was extremely popular and well known in Santa Monica. So he would also have parties, and he had a party for, when we were there, he wanted to introduce, you know, just have a whole big thing. So his house was, he had a cocktail party, and it was full. The house was full of people, and I'm at that time, I think I was, you know, 10 or 12 years old, and my kids, my brother and sister were younger. So I'm standing around in the living room, and he comes over to me. And he said, "See that guy in the corner over there?" And I looked over in the corner. It was a big stuffed chair and a guy with a beard sitting there with a pipe. He was just by himself, had a drink, just sitting. I didn't see a wife or anything. And I thought, oh, you know, he looked like a professor out of some movie. And he said, "See that guy?" I said, "Yeah." He said, you shouldn't do any. Don't go near that guy. Stay away from him. And I'm thinking, what? He said, yeah, he wrote Psycho. So he was the author of that. So, so it was pretty funny. Of course, I had seen Psycho. I mean, it was a scary movie, and all that. In those days, it was very hot. It had been, it's a classic American Hitchcock scary ass movie. So I didn't go over near him. I kind of stayed away. I didn't quite know what to do with that information. So yeah, he wrote a lot of books. His name is Robert Bloch, I believe. My grandmother, his first wife, was from Arizona, from the Kingman area, and that's where he met her. He became absolutely enamored with the Grand Canyon because of the trips they took out. I have tons of pictures of the car they drove out. I have the only picture I know of him standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. This is in like 1919, standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. That isn't a publicity picture. He's standing there. My grandmother took the picture. I mean, she dragged him out to the West, from New York where they were living, and introduced him to all that kind of stuff. And he became enamored with American natural beauty. It could be everything from the Mississippi Suite, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone Suite. I mean, he loved depicting and describing in music that which we see with our eyes when we go out there. I was just at the Grand Canyon this year. Again, took a bunch of my grandkids. We went out to see all the national parks in the southern Utah, and the Grand Canyon was part of that. And I brought a recording, and I went out at sunrise and told everybody there was like a couple of hundred people there. I stood up and said, "You're about to hear sunrise, 5-minute sunrise from the Grand Canyon Suite that my grandfather wrote." And I had a little boom box, and I put it on, and when it was done, they just all applauded. It was just an incredible moment to hear that played as the sun came up.
I first saw it at dawn because we got there the night before and camped. I was spellbound of the silence, Of course, then as it got brighter, then you could hear the birds chirping and nature coming to life. All of a sudden, bingo, there was the sun. I couldn't hardly describe it in words because words would be inadequate.
Wow. And they say we're running out of room for our garbage.
It's hard not to consider that exemplary and, just a pinnacle. And its popularity, it'd have to be that. He's got a lot of other stuff that's semi-unpublished and all that, but, performed last few recordings, but it's the Grand Canyon Suite. And if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, I don't assume you have. It's a long way from you. The music is so perfectly done for the experience there. It's just a stunning experience to do that, to hear the music played at the appropriate times. On the trail. I took my grandkids down inside. There were mules there, which is depicted in the piece.
His son says he played a personal role in creating the famous rhythmic figure for the On the Trail movement. When Grofé Jr. was a year old, his father was looking for a way to depict a man on horseback or mule.
My father was wheeling me around in a baby carriage, and across the street from the apartment there were some pile drivers putting in pilings for a building, and that makes that thunk, 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 type of sound. My baby buggy had a squeak in it, and the squeak went squeak, 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 and out of that came On the Trail.
This has got to be the most beautiful thing we've ever stole from the Indians.
That was the Grand Canyon as we know it today.
Stop. Well, I think I better have a look here.
On the trail. I mean, it's just it's a great piece of music and so descriptive of the natural wonder that the Grand Canyon is. So he loved doing that stuff, as I said earlier. He loved to put music to describe a natural wonder. As I said, I really considered it such a privilege to have known him, and even though he was, I didn't live down the street from him, which was unfortunate. I wish I had that opportunity where a lot of people lived near their grandparents. That wasn't how that worked. And it was also his third wife, so she wasn't exactly enamored with who? So they're coming down again now. And so I wish I could have known him a little better, but it was fortunate enough to have experienced him. And, he was funny, and he was really great to be around, very interesting. I want to make that clear. He was quite a guy. And his early history in that we've covered here a bit, was really exciting, and his work contributing to society and the music in our country was, as we've talked earlier, a little underappreciated. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see his work perform more. That's one of my goals, is to get his work perform more. It's not easy.
Ferdy Grofé is sometimes referred to as America's tone poem composer. He was a sentimentalist. His favorite composer was Tchaikovsky. His son says Grofé saw a wide range of emotional possibilities in the Grand Canyon.
Sunrise, birth, painted desert, the mystique, the unknown, the divine unknown, if you like. On the trail, the human comedy. Sunset, death. And then Cloudburst is death and resurrection, the battle of good and evil. And I think that's why most people find it so important because they can identify some emotion in themselves in his work.